Okay, 6 o'clock in Perth and 8 o'clock in the Eastern States. So good evening and welcome. My name is Garth Davis and I am the founder and CEO of Property Powerhouse. And we would love to welcome you this evening to this 30-minute educational webinar around Queensland and the tenancies and changes brought about by COVID-19 due to the emergency response regulations. So we do have our guest speaker, Samara Bedwell, on this evening, so we'll be turning to her shortly. A couple of things I just wanted to run through before we get cracking. So I know we've only got 30 minutes, but sometimes we get asked, so, what does Property Powerhouse do? So basically, by providing education, support and experience, Property Powerhouse enables mum and dad investors to buy properties around Australia, building up their wealth, enabling them to retire debt-free, and also to create multiple passive rental income streams. So that's what we strive to do, help our clients with that. So just getting into a couple of slides, just get in, see if she can turn the page. There we go. So just a disclaimer for tonight, the information is general in nature. It's not specific to your own individual requirements. We'd need you to speak to myself one-on-one or to Samara one-on-one to actually understand your personal details. Right, let's just have a quick look at what's been happening in the market and with property prices. What's been happening in the current market at the moment with property. So the data is care of CoreLogic. CoreLogic are like the property Bible of all residential sales in Australia. And this graph is always a very good one because this one comes out monthly. It talks about the capital cities and the month changes, the quarter changes, annual changes, and also the median values. So as we would expect, Sydney is right at the top there because of the median values, followed by Melbourne. Let's have a look what happened in the month of April. So this data is it's only about 7 days old. So there were only 2 capital cities where the median price dropped last month, and that was in Melbourne and the other one was in Hobart. So Hobart's been traveling strongly, as we know, and so has Melbourne and Sydney. Month by month is not always a true indication of actually what's going on, but the Melbourne and Sydney markets have been running very hot, and those are the ones we expected to have some cooling off, particularly that international migration will be put on hold due to COVID, and those were the cities that were getting most of the international migration. If you have a look at the quarter figures, that'll give you your last 3 months of what's happening. So Sydney and Melbourne are slowing. They were traveling at between 5 to 6% per quarter, which was massive figures. They were on track, trending for a 20 to 25% capital growth in 1 year, which is not sustainable. So there's a little bit of correcting going on in those markets. Brisbane is going steady as, and we really like that market. It was good to see Perth, who had come out of the tough times around about November last year, are still maintaining some positive territory. So generally what this message is that even with the COVID-19 out there, volume of sales are down across the country, but generally property values are holding. Okay, and that's what this graph is showing. So even though the numbers of sales, so less vendors, so less people are putting their properties on the market, they're not wanting people trudging through their homes on home opens, etc. And there's also been less buyers. But importantly, property values are holding. This next slide is about the gross rental yield. So this is before the property manager, etc., takes out any of their management fees. But as we know, Sydney rents very, very high. Very high versus other cities here. And as an investor, the general rule of thumb is if your property is worth $400,000 and your rent is $400 a week, it's a 5.2% rent return. So interest rates at the moment for investors around 3.3%. So anything below that is really going to be cash flow negative. So generally across Sydney, and obviously it's property by property, but Sydney probably still got a negative cash flow position if you were buying new, as well as Melbourne. Brisbane properties, the cash flows we're running for clients, cash flow positive, same with Adelaide and with Perth. So money is really cheap at the moment, and fortunately, most properties outside of Sydney and Melbourne will be cash flow positive. So just giving you an update, that data is care of CoreLogic as of the 30th of the 4th. All right. So that takes us on to introducing you our guest speaker for this evening, Samara Bedwell. And Samara is the Managing Director of Macwell Property Management based in Brisbane. I've known Samara probably about 15 years. She is fantastic. Her and her team, literally one of the top property managers and management companies in the country. Samara is the Managing Director of Macwell Property Management and has 18 years of experience in the industry. During her career, she has won many national and state industry awards. In 2001, Samara left her home in the country to train and work in Brisbane as a property manager assistant for Rain and Horn. Young and ambitious, she flourished in the big smoke of Vegas, I think they call it. And within 12 months, she was the senior property manager of the department, generating massive growth and consistently winning industry awards. In 2010, Samara moved on to establish and manage the property management department for a major builder developer from the ground up, gaining valuable people management skills and strong business acumen. Highly regarded as an industry expert in Queensland, Samara has written several key articles for industry publications and newspapers. She is known for exceeding expectations in customer service and believes in employing staff with positive, hardworking attitude. So with that, a very warm welcome to you, Samara, and over to you.
Hi, thanks Garth, and thanks everybody for joining us tonight. It's an honour to have been asked to come and have a chat with you guys tonight. COVID has obviously affected everyone in different ways, shapes and forms, and I think it's really important that we have a look at how COVID is affecting tenancies in Queensland and how we can sustain and get through this. So what I'd like to first say is that in Queensland, business is still operating. We are open for business. People still need homes. So we are renting properties, we are selling properties. So not everybody is affected. And I think initially perception was that everyone was going to be affected. There was mass panic. We saw it with the toilet roll situation. So we've now calmed down, it's come to a simmer, and we're seeing that not everybody has been affected. What I'm seeing, I guess, from where I'm sitting is that those that are most affected, unfortunately, the most high risk are student accommodation, where there is a lot of non-Australian resident tenancies, because obviously they don't get the assistance or the government support. And also those in areas such as Port Douglas, the Cape, those sorts of locations where a lot of their real estate needs are tourist driven. So obviously people either left when they were told that you wouldn't get the support, or they stayed and then lost incomes, rent's not turning over, so property's not turning over as well. But the good news for me is that business is still very much open, and that the areas in which we manage, which is a huge area across the greater southeast corner, we are seeing limited effects. So I'll get you just to move on to the next slide, if that's okay, Garth. So we had a couple of rental trends that I just want to quickly talk to you about, because you would have seen a little bit of this in the media. Back on the 9th of April, our Housing Minister, Michael de Brenni, made an outrageous statement stating that basically rent would be waived, and it sent investors and the real estate market into a huge panic, and landlords, agents and the support of the REIQ, driven by Antonio Mercarelli, fought against that housing minister and the state government and got a stamp out on what the proposal was announced. So that was really good. But what happened at that point in time was it created this hysteria where tenants said, well, we don't have to pay rent. So we've now had to see what we can do to make sure that that doesn't continue to happen. That created tenants that also weren't impacted to financially start trying to seek relief and things like that. So as you can imagine, if a government announces that you don't have to pay rent, every Tom, Dick and Harry's going to put their hand up and go, great, that's awesome. The other trend was that tenants that were impacted were starting to put their head in the sand, whether it would be out of pride, time, whatever, and weren't communicating with landlords. So there was this shutdown in communication. A positive side of trends that we saw around about a month and a half ago was that some landlords that weren't affected were actually offering rental relief to their tenants or trying to come up with arrangements prior to having any regulations or guidelines to cement their tenancies moving forward and to create, I guess, a loyalty and looking with the eye to post-COVID. So this was this trend that we saw within sort of 6 weeks ago. And then thankfully, with the efforts of the REIQ, a lot of landlords and a lot of the real estate industry, we said, no, this cannot be tenant-sided. COVID is much, much bigger than just tenants. It's everybody. Everybody can be affected, landlords and tenants. So we need something fair and some really good guidelines here. And so what happened is we ended up with a legislation or a regulation that was created called the Emergency Response Regulation that allowed us then to establish who could seek benefits and help in relation to if they had been affected by the tenancy. So I'll just get you to skip over to the next slides, Garth. So we get asked all the time and have done since the start of COVID-19 is what should I do if my tenant seeks rental relief? As investors, you may not be able to offer relief and others may not want to offer relief. I mean, everybody has their own story to tell. So we're going to look at clarifying or qualifying tenants for eligibility of COVID tenancy protection legislation. So it's 3 steps, and basically what the guidelines and the regulations have stated is if you as a tenant have been affected, you are either affected or suffering hardship due to COVID-19 because you or someone you care for are afflicted by the actual disease. You might be subject to a quarantine direction. You may have a health direction that has closed your employment or restricted your employee's trade of business. So therefore, maybe you don't have suppliers coming in, so your hours are reduced or you've lost your job. You are affected or afflicted if you are self-isolating because you or someone you live with are the primary carer for a vulnerable person. And the regulations that finally did come out gave us some good definitions of what was a vulnerable person. You are COVID affected if you are unable to work because of travel restrictions imposed under a health direction prevents you from working or returning home, or you have been prevented from leaving or returning Australia. So that was the first step in saying, is my tenant COVID affected financially or impacted financially? So if that box was ticked, and I'll get you to move to the next slide, Garth, then we needed to ascertain, has the tenant had their income reduced by more than 25% or more? And is their rent greater than 30% of their household income? So if all 3 boxes were ticked, we could then say that you have been affected financially by COVID-19. And so therefore, the regulations, or what we call the protective legislation, kick into place. So if we go to the next slide for us, Garth, if your tenant is able to prove to you that they have been COVID-19 financially affected, as stated in the previous slides, then the government have given the directive that they want the landlord and the tenant to try and self-negotiate. come up with an arrangement that is fair for both parties. And that's really what I think, if you've listened to the press releases, Scott Morrison has really tried to say as well. We want everyone to work together and work out the best arrangements for those people moving forward. So some landlords, of course, have been affected. They can't offer relief, so they might have to flatly reject any sort of relief to a tenant. Other arrangements that we've heard of or seen being made is where landlords are saying, well, we can give you a reduction in rent for a period of 2 months, so that might be $50 per week. However, after the 2 months, your rent will go back to the normal rent that you were paying, and you have to catch up the gap. So the new regulation that come in, despite that terrible announcement on the 9th of April, states that rent can be paid, must be paid at some point. So it didn't have to be a waiver, which is really good and really fair. Obviously, we are now really aware of the fact that there's going to be a debt toward the end of the tenancy that the tenants will have to make arrangements with the landlord to pay back. If a landlord and a tenant cannot come to an agreement, we have got a conciliation process in place, and it's a task force designed purely to operate for COVID-affected tenancies. So what happens there is we would be applying for conciliation because we cannot get an agreement. The tenant can't pay rent, but the owner can't allow any sort of breathing space either. And conciliation, we're sort of saying as an industry, try to avoid that process because it's long and it's lengthy and the time it takes to get there. If you've got breathing space, definitely negotiate a deal together without that push or that direction from an outside party. So conciliation, we have the task force now in place, and with conciliation, it is a requirement. They will be asking for complete evidence from the tenant claiming that they are affected to prove that they are COVID affected. And so the regulation also allows us as landlords and agents to also seek evidence. It's not just good enough for a tenant to say, yep, I'm COVID affected, you just have to take my word for it. We can actually seek that evidence to show that they've had that reduced income. The same way that you would if you were processing a tenancy application, checking the viability of the tenant's affordability before putting them into the property. So we can find out the same information. We can request letters from employers, accountants. In some instances, if they supplied bank statements at the commencement of the tenancy, we could ask for bank statements to, again, reconfirm that they are COVID affected. So that's sort of the two options that we have there, self-negotiation, or where there's no negotiation, the conciliation platform. So all of this directive, if you are like me and love a little bit of legislation, this is the new Residential Tenancies and Rooming Accommodation COVID-19 Emergency Response Regulation. And basically this come into play approximately, and I'm sorry, my mind's just gone blank, but I think it was around the 23rd of last month was sort of when we got that complete directive of this regulation. So screenshot that and definitely look that up and have a look at that. But if you're not so much into sections of acts and everything, I'll get you to click to the next slide for me, Garth. The state government created what they call the Hub, and I've given you the website there. The Hub is for landlords, it is for tenants, and it is for agents. It's across the board. They've made it very simple, very user-friendly. And if you have a look there, you'll see the red box with all the ticks in it, the Residential Tenancies Best Practice Guide. That is the guide that I have referred absolutely every one of my landlords to, and my tenants as well. And what that does is it talks landlords and tenants through understanding what makes a COVID-19 eligible tenancy and what doesn't stand up, so what would just fall back into a normal tenancy, and different scenarios and how we can negotiate different terms. So there's lots of scenarios in there, and it covers more things than just the rental relief. It talks about domestic violence impact during COVID-19, break leases, change in shared tenancies, all the things that we as landlords and agents come across on a day-to-day basis, even prior to COVID-19. It's just now that we have to change a little bit of how we tend things if the tenancy is qualified as COVID-19 affected. So that is a great tool, and I really would encourage you as investors to jump on and have a look at that, because I think what it will do is it'll take the anxiety away that as an investor there's not much going on for you, because I can tell you there is plenty now protections and plenty of ways that we can deal through this COVID-19 with tenancy matters. So I'll get you to go over to the next slide, Garth, and we'll just quickly address the hot topics that I've come across and the frequently asked questions. You may have heard about the no eviction moratorium here in Queensland. And again, there was a bit of an uproar in relation to, oh my God, we just can't evict tenants. We can't do anything with tenants. The no eviction moratorium, we need to make sure is really clearly understood. It only applies to those tenancies that are COVID affected. And I think there's this big misconception that it's all tenancies. So we've really got to make sure that you understand that if the tenancy is COVID affected, that's where these protection legislations come into play. So the no eviction moratorium is for those tenants that are obviously financially impacted and have proven to be financially impacted by COVID-19, that we can't take steps to evict those tenancies. We can't issue notices to remedy or notices to leave, that they are safe from the eviction process, because we don't want to see those people homeless, and I can understand that point of view as well. The other hot topic was, how do we access our property for inspections when we've got health directions or we've got compliance for smoke alarms and things like that, as well as what if we've got our property for sale. And actually, just as close as last night, we started to see some of the restrictions lift that we had. So one of the first things that came out was that we couldn't hold open homes. And we as agents love open homes because it's that pressure cooker that gets competition. So we were told, no, you can't hold them, but you can hold open for inspections as long as you adhere to the health directives with the social distancing, etc. As of last night, we were advised that we can, again, host open homes because we're seeing a bit of relaxation. However, there are regulations and restrictions around that, as that we can only have 6 people in the property at one time, including us as the agent. And again, we must be really conscious of those health directions with social distancing and hygiene and making sure if you're ill, you're not coming into properties and things like that. Accessing rental properties for maintenance and compliance, that can still happen. However, tenants may refuse access on certain provisions, and those provisions I think are very much common sense. If they are suffering from COVID or have someone in the property that is suffering of COVID that they care for, if they are vulnerable, and when we talk about vulnerable, we're talking about the elderly, those that have immune deficiencies and things like that. So they're things that you would obviously understand that you wouldn't want people traipsing through, because we're trying to still stop the spread of this virus that is still present. Another big change that happened with the COVID-19 emergency response was lessors' rights to vacant possession. So what we have seen in this is that some landlords would like to get their houses ready for sale and sell them. Now, that doesn't mean they're COVID affected as such, but they just feel that they need to on-sell their property, and to do that with a tenant in place is not going to be easy or beneficial for their finances. So we now have the right under this new regulation to issue the tenant 2 months' notice to vacate the premise, so that we can start negotiating. So we issue the 2 months and then we start negotiating with the tenant when we want that vacant possession, so that we can ready our homes and commence the sales campaign. Again, if a lessor found themselves needing to occupy the property or a family member to occupy the property where they had a tenant in a lease because they've been impacted or it's not financially viable for them to be paying rent somewhere else, we could now issue a tenant with 2 months and start the negotiations to take back possession of our property and move into. So that was a bit of a win for those showing that landlords too are affected with COVID-19. Break leases was the next topic of contention, and break leases have always been a situation even prior to COVID-19 where it's the tenant ultimately not being able to fulfil their legal obligations of their lease, and they were required to either self-negotiate between landlord and tenant as to what was fair and reasonable compensation for not being able to hold that lease, and they could be responsible to pay rent up until a new tenant takes place, and those sorts of things. With COVID-19, if the tenant actually falls eligible with a few extra criteria, so if the tenant has lost more than 75% of their income and has less than $5,000 in a bank account, we can't hold them to the same terms. Basically, it's not viable or financially viable for them to be in that property. They can't afford it, and it's likely that they'll never pay the debt at the end. So the regulations have allowed for those people that have less than $5,000 and have lost more than 75% of their income to give 2 weeks notice of their intention to vacate the property, even though they're on a fixed lease, and then they have to pay rent right up until they move out of the property. And then what they do is they compensate the lessor 1 week's rent as, I guess, good faith. Look, sorry, I can't pay my rent, but here's my notice and here's a week's rent compensation. And then that's it. We cannot hold them for any other fees, charges, break lease fees, compensation for rent up until a new tenant takes occupancy. All of that is waived if the tenant meets the criteria of losing that 75% of income or has less than $5,000 in the bank. If a tenant is affected by COVID but has only lost 10% of their income and has $50,000 in the bank, they are not eligible for that capped break lease. We can then negotiate further terms in that. So there's lots of different little areas to be aware of, but these are all protections for the most vulnerable, and protections though for us as landlords to make sure that we can still seek compensation to those least affected as well. Another question that we really get asked as well, I get asked all the time, is should I be selling my investment property or should I be further investing? I can't give financial advice. ASICs would kick my backside from here to kingdom come. But what I believe is I'm a bit of an optimist, and for every downturn, there is always, a good opportunity somewhere there if you find it. So what I would say to you guys is assess your own financial position with your planner, your financial planner, your broker, your accountant. Find out where you're situated. Talk to your preferred sales agent and property manager about the opportunities that they're seeing or what they perceive the market to be doing to see whether it's the right time to sell or to buy. What I can tell you is at Macwell, our recent sales stats show really, really reduced days on market. So we've been really fortunate during this period to turn over property very, very quickly. So we've just got a really good example of a property that was on our rent roll. The investors were aging and ready to retire. They probably worked longer than they first anticipated. So we knew that they were going to be exiting the market, the investment market, shortly. But whether or not COVID brought that on a little sooner, I'm not too sure. But anyway, we got the photos done on the Thursday. By the Saturday, we couldn't have open homes as such, so we were doing inspection by appointment. The first guy that came in put in an offer. Jason, who is my sales manager and my husband, negotiated up very quickly, and we got the contract, and it was sold within literally 2 days. So photos Thursday, market Friday, sold on Saturday. So that was a fantastic result. And we are seeing that. We've got other sales results like that as well, because I think what we're doing now is we're we're removing the chaff from the wheat, so to speak, and we're getting genuine buyers in the marketplace that have all their ducks lined up, and they're not time wasters. So the same goes in relation to our property management stats. Whilst we look after a broad range of property across a wide area, we've seen very minimal impact on days on market or the requirement for price reductions. Oversupplied areas, which, you know, if you're looking to invest, talk to me about different areas and I can tell you which ones are potentially more oversupplied than others. But we've actually been able to increase rents in recent times, and just because COVID-19 is here, it doesn't mean we can't increase rents. If the tenancies are unaffected, we can increase rents. So we have been able to put increases on our properties in some areas. So I think what we see out of all of this is that we just, as agents and landlords, need to adjust the way that we operate and the way in which we read the market. And I think research and doing these sorts of webinars are probably the best way to make the best choices as you move forward. So I'll put it back over to you, Garth, and see how we went from there.
Excellent. Well, as you can hear, attendees, what a superstar Samara is, and really top property manager and property management. Her clients rave about her, and we very confidently recommend her and refer our clients to use her as a property manager. Right, we've got 4 quick questions to answer that have come through. So a quick one for Samara. Samara, I think your rent roll, you have about 210 properties under management in Southeast Queensland, so that's Brisbane and Gold Coast. Are there many tenants in a default position and or not paying the rent on your portfolio? So of your 210, is this a big problem of tenants not paying rent?
Garth, our arrears rate currently is less than 1%. So perception, I think, is that rental arrears was going to be a mass issue, and I can't speak for other agencies. I'm sure there are some that have got higher arrears rates than that. We always consistently had a low arrears rate because I'm very strict on that policy. But we've got less than 2%. And the tenants that there's 2 tenants that have been affected by COVID-19 that have negotiated with the landlord a payment plan or a negotiation where they will be paying the gap at a later date. So yeah, no, not a big issue at all.
Okay, so that's maybe only 3 or 4 out of 210 properties. So yeah, not an issue at all, which is really good for us landlords and property investors to know. Also, what's happening, there may be a perception that there's a lot of investors trying to offload their properties at the moment. Is that the reality? Of your 210 properties that you're under management, how many have been put on the market, and how long have they been on the market?
So no, there's not a lot of people that we've come across needing to offload their properties, which says to me that with interest rates the way they are, people were getting themselves into a reasonably good condition. And I guess the fact that we've got low arrears as well is showing that people aren't as affected as much as people thought they would be. So as I was previously saying, we did have the one investor that got out of the market, and it was literally one day. I'm going to call it one day, you might call it 2 days, from time of going to market to getting the contract. We had another sale in Wellington Point just recently that it was a cash unconditional sale, and it was in less than 7 days. So time on market for us is brilliant. I know that's not across the board, but if you work to your market and your marketing campaigns are fantastic and you're transparent with your buyers and your sellers, you will get the deals done. But no, there's not an oversupply of stock coming on the market. That's for sure.
Okay, so that's really good. So we don't have an issue with tenants not paying their rent. We don't have an issue with other landlords trying to offload. Another question that's come through is, how many properties of your 210 in your management are actually sitting vacant at the moment? And have vacancies been a problem for you or your landlords?
We've actually seen no increased vacancy rate on our rent roll to this period, to this time. So because we cover a great area, as I was sort of saying throughout the presentation, there are certainly some areas that have higher supply than others. So we know that days on market can sometimes be greater in those areas, but we've seen no change. So I've got 5 properties advertised at the moment, but only 2 of those are vacant, and they were already in a lower turnover market, so where there's that extra supply, an affordable community with a lot of supply even prior to COVID-19. So even at this point, we've taken applications on those properties, but we've declined those applications just based on, we look for the really, really good pieces of fruit out of the market. So yeah, we could have rented them and had no vacancy, but that's not our bag.
No, well, that's excellent. So again, 2 properties vacant out of 210. So, you know, about a 1% vacancy. So again, great kudos to you and your team, doing a fantastic job there. The last question we'll be answering tonight is, are rents going up or going down, or is it certain suburbs? And if that is the case, are there some suburbs where they're actually going down?
We've seen rents actually hold really steady. Yes, there are some suburbs that we have been able to increase rents because the vacancy rate is so low and the available stock is so low. The areas where there's a little bit more supply, they're actually holding really steady. So the suburb in where we've got our 2 vacant properties at the moment, it is a massive new development. Like, we're talking years and years of construction, and the infrastructure's, you know, still coming, so that's to be expected. And we've seen slight reductions from when they were first built as new homes, move to a slight decrease in rent, because unfortunately there's still new product coming all the time, but the new product that's coming out is still holding solid. So no, I don't see huge rental decreases across the board at all, and nothing driven by COVID-19 in our area. As I was saying at the commencement of the slides, potentially if you're in those high tourism areas or reliant on international travellers, then you might be seeing that. But no, where we cover Gold Coast, Brisbane, northern suburbs, western suburbs, no problems at all.
Okay, and we'll be sending out a recording of this video tonight. Will it be also, are you okay for us to share the slides as a PDF, and I can share those with the attendees tonight?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, just a couple of feedback comments that have come in just before we wind up. So please just hang in there and listen in, guys, because we're nearly there. This is from Jamie Horner, who is a top property manager based in Perth and one of our preferred partners here. Hi, Samara. Thanks for a fantastic summary of how this affects property owners in Queensland. You've had to work with such a difficult announcement and uncertainty, and it's fantastic that you've got your way through all this and supporting your owners and tenants with such knowledge. She also came and said, also from Jamie, your arrears rate is a testament to how your team is working to assist and educate your owners and tenants. That's from Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, you're a good operator too, my love.
He says, well done. I know how hard it is at the moment of time. So guys, thank you very much. We went a couple of minutes over, but I think it was very important. As I said, we will be sending out the recording from tonight, so watch that at your leisure again, and there will be some slides there. Thank you very much. At Property Powerhouse, we stay committed to educate our investors and potential investors to make good educated decisions. So thank you once again to Samara. A fantastic presentation. I'm just checking in here. I think we've got a couple of chats coming in here. Yeah, just thank you from Cecilia and JP in Victoria for tonight's information. Well done. Looking forward to future webinars. DJ, thank you. Always work so hard for us landlords. You're a star. So, okay, they love you. When I talk to my clients and say, how's your property going? They say, oh, they just love Samara and her team. Thanks from Herman. So yeah, very well received. Thank you so much, Samara, and keep up the wonderful work. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Garth.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.